I'm Sarina Fazan, taking a risk, making a difference, and changing the course of your life. Remarkable stories from people defying the odds. You're listening to On the Record.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast, On the Record, my 50th podcast. I can't believe it. What a milestone moment. That's why I have asked two of my dear friends here to join me. Debra Schrils, of course, is a lawyer and a meteorologist, a cruise show host, and my first ever guest on a podcast.
Yay, how about that?
And then, of course,
Full circle.
Many know my friend Jim Rathmann. He and I worked together on Joe Exotic, Tigers, Lies, and Cover Up, my national debut as a producer. So thank you both so much for being here.
Absolutely. And you know, when Sarina said that she was going to do a 50th podcast, and I said, well, what's the topic? And she said, me, meaning her. And I said, oh my gosh, it's amazing because she has such an incredible background that nobody really knows about. And in fact, Jim didn't know anything about it either until really a few minutes ago. I filled him in a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit, and I'm going to try to sprinkle you with questions. And Jim, you do the same, because you are not going to believe Sarina's background and how she triumphed over an amazing set of circumstances growing up.
Well, can I first say, when I said the podcast was about me, I was meant to say that it's about like my podcast subjects, love in America, dating in America, all these, law and order.
Right, and I said, no. I said, no, it cannot be about the podcast.
Your story is so much bigger than just the 50th, but
Oh my
congratulations on your 50th podcast, by the way.
Thank you.
And thank you for inviting us to be a part of this special moment.
Thank you. I hope I don't get too emotional or anything, That is
Well,
kind of
if
my
you do, we'll just reel you back in.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to start by asking you about your, as a small child, you grew up in the state of Washington, and you had a very traditional Indian family, right?
Yes, I did. So we actually moved from India to Seattle, Washington, and we moved from India when I was only 3 years old because I was really sick. The doctor said that I wasn't going to make it. They don't know exactly why. I just couldn't digest the food. So my parents, I was the eldest. I had a sister and two brothers, but at the time it was myself, my sister, my mom was pregnant. So my dad made the big decision of moving to this country basically to save my life. And we moved to Seattle.
And you were in Catholic school growing up, right?
Yes. So to fast forward the story, so we moved here when I was 3. My dad, who I always have said is my hero, gets a job in Olympia, Washington, which is the state capital, and he works for the first female governor there, Dixie Lee Ray. So here I am. Deb, it was interesting when you said I grew up in a traditional Indian background. I honestly did not know that background at all. I went to a all-girls Catholic school. At this point, I'm growing up there, and I think my life is perfect. Like my dad has a great job. I come home to my mom making chocolate chip cookies. I have such a close relationship with my siblings. I love life, and my dreams were to go to college.
I was just going to ask you that. What did you want to do when you were younger and you were thinking back on it? Like, what was that? What drove you? What was the one thing you really just wanted to do outside of college for your career?
So my entire life, I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. So when I first moved to this country, I didn't know how to speak English. English was actually my 5th language. And so I learned how to speak English by watching Walter Cronkite and Barbara Walters. And I made a microphone out of aluminum foil. And I remember standing there on my parents' bed, watching the news, and my dad saying to me, "You don't even know what that is." And I said, "I do know what it is. They talk about world events, and that's what I'm going to be when I grow up." So that's how I learned how to speak English. And I had a horrible speech impediment where for 8 years I was in very serious therapy. And I just have to say, I commend the teachers at St. Placid Academy where I went and my fellow students there because they never made fun of me. I was one of those kids that I literally would have to bend my head down to say my L's and my B's, but I always was committed to becoming a broadcast journalist.
And you were always a great student too. And tell us about the letter that you received.
Okay, so I have to say I'm one of those goody two-shoes, right? For lack of a better term. I was on track to be the class valedictorian. So and I wanted to go to college, not just any college. I wanted to go to Harvard. I don't know why, but I just had to go to Harvard.
Well, it's so prestigious of
Yeah,
a
of
school,
course.
too.
I mean, who doesn't want to go to
Ivy
Harvard,
League,
right?
It's Harvard.
Just the idea.
Presidents have gone to Harvard.
Yeah, right. So Harvard was just my ultimate dream. So I went to the nuns at the school, and I told the guidance counselor, and she said, well, let's start the process. So anyway, I don't tell my parents this because I want this to be a huge surprise, because I'm thinking, gosh, my mom and dad are going to be
So proud of you.
Yes, so excited and so proud of me. I actually got in under the there was a program at the time that Harvard wrote back. They said, depending on your score, your SAT score, but I'd done a lot like in high school that I you don't even know this, Deb, but I had written a book, I had done all of this other stuff, all these extracurricular activities. So I get this letter. I can't even explain my heart. So I go home and I go back to the chocolate chip cookies. My mom was making, chocolate chip cookies, and I want people to know, and if I start crying, I'm sorry, but I idolized, my parents. And I wanted to wait for my dad to come home, but it was 3:00 in the afternoon and I couldn't wait. So I told my mom, Mom, you won't believe this. I got a letter and I'm going to Harvard. And she looked at me and said, you're not going to Harvard. And I said, what do you mean? I'm not going to Harvard. And then I said, if it's about the money, I'll pay for it. I said, I'll work whatever job, I'll do it. And she said, no. You're not going to college. You have to get married. And then if your husband lets you go to Harvard, you can go to college.
And what was your response?
I thought she was lying. I didn't know what to think.
Just in disbelief.
Right.
In total disbelief. I mean, we didn't grow up again with the, Indian traditions. So I thought, again, there's no way. So at this point now it's 3:30. And I stood in front. We used to have a door, and I used to stand there and wait for my dad all the time. And he would, bring home candy or whatever, the fondest memories. But I stood in the foyer for an hour and a half waiting for my dad to come home, because I'm thinking,
well, he's obviously going to say, of course I can go.
Of course, And so I'll never forget, he walks in the door, his briefcase, and I said to him, I'm like, Papa, so I think Mom's losing her mind. I said, you will not believe this. So of course I'm holding the letter. And I said, I got into Harvard, and she said I have to get married. And I'll never forget, he puts down his briefcase, and he used to call me Quarter Pint, because I used to love Little House on the Prairie. And he said, you're too little to be a half pint. So he's called me Quarter Pint. And I think I'm in shock. That's why I'm not crying. But he said, your mom's right. You have to get married.
And by this, they meant an arranged Indian marriage.
Mm-hmm. An arranged.
With the cultures that.
Yes.
But you didn't have that in your upbringing.
At all. So it was such a shock. And then I went into shock. So I was 16 at the time, almost 17, and I went into complete shock. I quit speaking. And going back to the stuttering issues, I don't know, I guess you can delve into the psychology of stuttering and whatever, but I just couldn't talk anymore. I just fell into a really deep depression. And my parents, they thought what would be best was to move out of Olympia, Washington, move to Chicago, Illinois, where there were a lot more Indian girls, so I could see that type of life, and I could adapt.
So they wanted to immerse you in an Indian culture so that you would be like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yes. So
that's what happened.
My dad quit his job. And, we had a very middle-class upbringing, but a really nice life, Again, my mom volunteered at the school library. I went to a Catholic school. We lived in a neighborhood where all of us would play. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago, and in a suburb of Chicago. And my siblings were, and rightfully so, angry at me. So their whole world had collapsed.
So I think part of it that I'm trying to understand too is that typically when people are raised with that kind of culture, it starts from birth, right? And you follow all the customary ways and the traditions that follow. But in this particular case, you didn't have that all the way up. And then now all of a sudden you're about to be an adult and go into the world on your own. And now it's like, hey, we're going to follow this culture.
Yes.
Almost 18 years late.
Yes. Yes. So it was,
That's shocking.
I think it's because I grew up, you know, in a community where the culture, there was no recognition of that culture.
Sure.
When I got to Chicago, my parents put me into a Catholic girls' school, and at this point, too, my grades are not. My grades fell, but I started to do okay. You know, here I am, like back in school, and just very quiet. You know, I wasn't my personality. But then by that December, so I start my senior year, and as you know, I was very hesitant to talk about this in the podcast because the last thing I ever want to do is hurt my parents. And I never fault them for any of this because they were following what they thought was best for the culture. And, you know, but I did end up getting the winter break of my senior year.
Now, how did that happen? Was this someone that you knew? Was it someone that you had no idea who he was? And all of a sudden they said, this is the man you're going to marry?
My parents knew him, a very smart guy, you know, from London. And they thought it would be a good fit because oftentimes as arranged marriages go, you know, the parents get involved and they try to, you know, find the best match for you. And so they decided, and I think they also were nervous because of professing my dreams and what I wanted to do, that they thought maybe the best thing is like, just let's get her engaged
as soon as possible.
Yes. But I will say, so I get engaged in December and I came back to school and again, all my grades fell and I just could not speak. I couldn't speak. And the nuns at this school, it was St. Mary's in Illinois, in a suburb of Chicago. I mean, Illinois, of course, is a state, but I went to a school in a suburb outside of Chicago. They put me into counseling. But do you guys remember the movie Good Will Hunting, where Matt Damon would look at the clock and not say one word?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I said to myself, I can't talk to them about my family because I can't disgrace my family.
So your school, the nuns at your school didn't know that this was happening. They didn't know you were engaged. They didn't know any of this.
No, I would take my ring off. Like, so, you know, I had an engagement ring, but whenever I got to school, I would take my ring off and hide it. And I really, really tried. I tried to go back and tried to, and what's crazy is the memories of those times, I really honestly didn't remember until only just a few years ago. Like this podcast could go on for hours just because of things that you deal with and the memories come back in like flashes.
Push it to the back of your mind and don't want to relive it in a lot of ways.
I finally did tell my story though to the, there was a woman who worked in the bookstore at the school and she had two girls that went to the school. One was in my grade. Her name was Janice Norick, and she was so dear, you know, to my heart. When I would walk back to class, she'd talk to me, and I would actually talk to her. So instead of having me going to counseling, the nuns had me work with her in the bookstore, and I finally told her the story about being engaged.
And so then what happened?
So then the nuns, you know, called me in, and when I said the nuns, you know, that the entire staff was, you know, and so the counselor said, of course your parents are going to let you go to college. We just need to write them a letter and everything will be fine. Your parents are going to understand. But I knew deep down in my heart that wouldn't be the case. So my little brother, Sean, my parents had him later in life. So at this point, I'm almost 18. I'm 17. He's only 3. I obsessed with him. I prayed for him for years and years. And I love all my siblings, but I tell you the story because I would come home from school and I would get on my hands and knees and pray to God to give me the strength to make the right decision. I didn't want to leave, but I didn't want to get married. But what broke me was one day we got so my parents, after I got engaged, promised that I wouldn't have to get married for a full year because I was really scared. I'm this innocent little girl.
Sure.
I never even held a boy's hand, and I didn't remember this part of the story until 2018. So it's only been 2 years ago, and it was my aunt who told me, and all of a sudden I remembered it. But a package was delivered to the house, and I opened the package, and it was my wedding invitations for that June. And so that's when I went to the nuns, and I said, okay, let's write them the letter. But in my heart, again, I knew that my parents probably, for lack of a better term, and again, no, and I understand where they were coming from, but disowned me from the culture.
So what happened? They wrote the letter.
I wrote the letter, and I the nuns planned to call my mom in to give her the note. And the plan was, because the graduation was within the next week, that they would give it to them, they would understand, and everything would be okay. Well, Tammy Norick, which was the daughter of Janice Norick, she had a car, so we were driving. The seniors were out, got a half day of school or whatever. And the last image I had, I'm stuttering, but the last image I had was my mom holding Sean's hand, walking into the school. And then I didn't see them for years. And I never went to my high school graduation. I graduated, but the fear was if I went to the graduation, I'd have to go back home.
So you never went back home?
I never went back home after that day.
So what happened?
So Janice took me in. She was a divorced mom of 2. But she said,
and this is the woman who worked in the bookstore.
Mm-hmm. She said I could only stay there for a couple of months because, she's a mom and has to take care of her kids. So I had a couple months to try to figure out what I was going to do. I got a job while I was working with them, like shampooing hair. The only thing I took with me when I ran away was that acceptance letter from Harvard. So I didn't take anything else. I didn't have
clothes, anything.
Nothing. And I had no identification of who I was. I don't even remember how I got the identification. I know that was a huge, long process, but I honestly don't quite remember. But one day, you work off tips, when you shampoo hair. I took the L down from the suburb of Chicago and went to a bank called First Chicago. And the bank is no longer there. It's right downtown. And here I am, 18, but I look like I'm 14 years old, and I went up to the bank teller and I said, I need a loan. And the bank teller said to me, she looked at me like I was crazy. Right. And I don't have any identification because I don't have any identification.
Yeah.
And she said, and at this point I had not cried. So at all, I broke down in the middle of the bank. And I said, you don't understand. You have to let me go to college. You have got to let me go to college. And so I show her the letter. A man comes out from the door and he said, what's going on? And he called me in. And anyway, make a very long story short, he was the bank manager. And I remember looking at his pictures with his wife and his 3 beautiful girls. And he said, so what's going on? I told him. I found out that he did call the school to verify my story, And I think at this point the nuns felt, I think they felt horrible and also a sense of responsibility.
Because they were the ones who kind of pushed you to write the letter.
Mm-hmm. The remarkable part of the story is that he helped personally co-sign my loan because I couldn't get loans. And
wow.
Then I worked, 4 jobs. I worked as a waitress. I worked as a hostess. There's many, many things that happened in those years.
And he had some connections
Yes.
and was able to get you into Northwestern.
Yes. So he was able to get me in.
Which is an incredible school.
Yes. So the whole thing was like, you can't go to Harvard. You can't go out of state, and I ended up, I know my life has taken so many twists and turns, but I was hit by a car, an 80-year-old driver, hit and broke my pelvis. My pelvis was shattered in 5 places. The reason why that's important is because I couldn't walk. So I couldn't get to school. So I ended up graduating from Loyola. And it took me, I had to miss 1 year of school because, I was funding it all on my own. But but then I ended up graduating from college. And
I mean, just the fact that you were able to graduate from college, and I mean from a great college, and were accepted in a couple of other amazing colleges. I mean, the fact that you actually persevered through all of that and graduated is amazing. And then you went on to, we could talk forever about what you went on to do, including 4 Emmys.
Yes, which is
No, that's-
incredible.
But
I feel so guilty, though, right now, even sitting with both of you here. Like, I can't believe that I'm not crying because I feel numb. But 2, I still feel a horrible sense of betrayal to my parents and to my
you
family.
feel like you're doing the betrayal.
Yes, I feel like I'm doing the betrayal.
Which is absolutely not true.
And people will say that. People will say that to you, but it's hard to explain. And maybe, Jim, you can even...
Well, I think obviously you love and care for your parents and your family very much. And you only knew what you had growing up, from a small child, from your family moving you from India to Washington so they could save your life. That was the whole purpose of going.
Yes.
So you have those family connections and that family love, and I can understand and relate to how you're feeling. Because obviously you and I have, my past is not like yours, but I had some challenging times in my upbringing as well, and so there's moments within my life, specifically with my biological mother, but you still feel that sense of I need to protect my family and not say certain things or go down certain avenues out of respect and out of love.
Yes.
So I can totally get that, but I'm blown away because I just found out a lot of this, most of it while just sitting here listening, and then what was told to me just a few minutes before we sat down. And
I mean,
I am just incomplete in all of what I'm hearing.
We've only barely touched on some of this. I mean, her actual college life, getting through college, in addition to being hit by a car and not being able to walk. I mean, the fact you couldn't go home on the holidays. They
Yeah.
closed the dorms.
Right.
Yeah, they did. They did. They closed the dorm, so I had a place to stay. And then,
It's just so inspirational to sit here and listen to this because somebody that knows what they want in life, they know where they want to go, and no matter the obstacles, you still found a way to overcome each and every obstacle. And I am just inspired by that. And I know so many people listening to this right now are going to be super inspired by what you've been able to do because it's remarkable. And on top of that, and one of the things I think this world needs a lot more of is those few acts of kindness from people that know that you're in a situation
yes,
like what's Janice,
North,
and
passed away from cancer.
and the manager of the bank to take somebody you
Right.
don't even know and say, okay, I verified your story. Let me help you get into Northwestern's an amazing school.
Right.
It has one of the best medical schools too on top of that. So it's a remarkable school to get into. And here it is, he was willing to take the risk on somebody because he saw something in you just like we all see it when we met you. You instantly see it, you instantly gravitate to that. And he saw that too. And he did that act of kindness with helping you get into a school, helping to co-sign. How often do you hear of that these days?
No.
It's
You
really an
don't.
amazing story. It really is.
It's unbelievable. And I'm sitting here and just like, oh my God.
And again, we've only just scratched the surface of it. And tell us a little bit about Oprah and how she reached out to you.
So it was during that time, and I believe this was when I was at Loyola, and the counselor was helping me get funding, so she was a friend with one of the producers on the show. So she contacted one of the producers on Oprah's show, and they contacted me and they said, we need to do a story about your life. Mm-hmm. And I said no. And people look at me and they said, you said no to Oprah. So Oprah, if you're listening, I do think you are absolutely amazing. And
maybe you would change your mind now. Maybe we could go back now and do it.
Maybe I would change my mind now. But at the time, I was thinking to myself, I've hurt my family so much. I cannot go on a national show or do a show and talk about it. And so
it's not just national. You're talking Oprah. That's the whole world.
That's international.
And they said at the time and they were so generous. But they said this could help pay for college. You would not be in debt. And I refused to do it. That's why I feel so guilty even about talking today. Like I do. I have such this overwhelming sense of guilt.
Well, we're here to tell you there's absolutely nothing you should be guilty about.
The thing that I find inspiring, and I keep hearing about your stories you're going forward, is you wanted to write that story. And you didn't want the handout. You may have needed to help along the way to get things done, but you wanted to do it your way. You wanted to be able to work. You wanted to be able to earn every single thing that you've got. So to have a handout to pay for your college, although that sounds wonderful, and maybe going back in time is something you would have considered, but that wasn't what your story was, and it wasn't how you wanted to write it. Your writing it was, no, I'm going to go ahead and hold down these jobs, and I'm going to work for every dollar that I make to pay the school back on my own, because that's just who you are. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible.
I have to say, on behalf of my parents too, it took them a long time for us to be able to communicate. It wasn't until after Sammy was born that we started becoming a family again, and Sammy's 13. So I was on my own for all those years. I did beg my parents for their forgiveness. And, people say, why is that for me? I need their forgiveness. My mom is the one that said to me, you need to start to write a book about your life. And so
she's giving you the permission to do it.
She's giving me the permission to do it. So I actually did start 2018. I started to write a blog about, and I called it Trailblazer. That's why my podcast was initially called Trailblazer. I started to write a blog about my life and about the early years, and it is on my website. But then my brother-in-law passed away suddenly. He was diagnosed with lung cancer, never smoked a day in his life. And I couldn't write anymore because it was just too painful to watch my sister go through that. She had an arranged marriage, but with him, and with HK, we call him. And that was the love of her life. And maybe, I know I'm getting so, because I did not realize this. So when he passed away, he's in his 50s. Like how could he have passed away, right? And you know how they always say sometimes things happen for a reason?
Sure.
For years and years, I've said, how in the world could this have happened to me for a reason? To be left alone in the world. And a lot of bad things can happen to girls when they're 18, alone in the world. How could this happen to me? So after HK passed away, and I've never told this story, but I was sitting in the dark in my room, and it was so weird. For the first time I realized, and it was like a message that he sent to me. He said, if you had not run away from home, I would have never met your sister, and we would have never gotten married. And that's so true, because my parents pushed her to get married because they were so afraid that the same thing would happen to her. We're really, close in age, and he wouldn't have been around, like, cause he was a few years older.
Right.
And my sister happened to call me, and she said to me, and she's so strong and has such faith, Shayla, and it was the weirdest moment of my life, because she said to me, don't you realize if you never ran away from home, we would have never gotten married? And it was that same, and she said,
she said the same thing.
That I had this feeling. Wow. And then she said, and I was married to him for 28 years, and he's the love of my life. And so many people in their life never have that type of love.
Right.
So I thank God that I had that type of love. And she said, my prayer is for you to find it. That might be a good closing, right? That was pretty.
Wow.
Isn't that pretty deep? I know.
Very deep and very
Yeah.
emotional.
Incredible. Well, I know there are many, many more chapters that that we could do on podcasts about it, and maybe one day you'll be willing to talk even more about it, because I know there's so much more, and your history is so deep and rich.
I can't even believe that I went there, guys, to talk about it. You guys are pretty good.
I'm so glad you did, though.
It just shows how strong you are.
I don't even
You're
know
incredible.
I don't even know. That's so, I don't even know how to end the podcast. I really don't even know how to wrap it up. Maybe you can do it for me,
You
Jim.
do it.
Oh, leave
You're
it
the
on
journal.
me.
You're the international journalist.
Yeah, I don't know
Yes.
about all that.
Yeah.
I'm still learning the ropes, but I'm really inspired by hearing this, and I just know that everybody listening to this is going to be in the same situation I'm sitting in right now. It's like playing tug of war with my own emotions here. Very inspiring and incredible story, and it just shows the true grit and how strong you are. I mean, it's incredible. It really is. And I think the next time we get into this podcast, we're going to get into part 2.
Yeah, exactly.
The Sarina Fazan story, because it's truly
It needs to be a movie, right?
it needs to be a movie. It needs to be everywhere, because this is exactly the type of stories that make it out there for everybody to hear. And the thing is, there's so many people out there that could hear this right now and get inspired to just go that extra mile like you have, and to do a little bit more. You never know what that one word is or that one person you inspire, but if you inspire just one, it's so worth it. And I think you're going to inspire thousands upon thousands. I really do. It's incredible.
And this is super fitting for your 50th podcast, too,
Yeah.
I think.
I appreciate it, guys. Well, my message, I guess, would be, always to follow your dream. And, we have something here called Let's Spread Kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been through my examples of help that I've gotten, But yes.
Always spread kindness.
Yep.
Never look down at anyone unless you're willing to give them a hand to pick them up. That's
Oh, I love that.
Love it.
one of the ways and the rule of life that I always try to follow. So,
Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, everybody.
till next time.
Bye-bye.